Very excited for this next talk. You're going to hear from Alban Preldakaj, who is the principal and head of core engineering at Apollo Global Management. I believe Alban's also been recently elevated to distinguished engineer at Apollo, so congratulations on that. Alban's going to dive into how his team has driven adoption of Temporal to power millions of reliable, auditable transactions at enterprise scale for Apollo. So, without further ado, please put your hands together and welcome Alban up to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Again, my name is Alban Preldakaj. I'm a software engineer here at Apollo Global Management. And before I begin today's talk, I really want to speak about where we were, how did we get to this spot, and what is Apollo? So Apollo is a global alternative asset manager. We manage something on the order of $900 billion assets under management. If we look at our engineering journey, 5 years ago, the number of engineers we had were in the double digits. We're now in the triple digits. So we've quintupled in the past 4 years. And so looking at some of the challenges required to scale our systems, scale our workflows, a lot of things happened in the past 5 years. More assets under management, more workflows across disparate systems, more systems, more dependencies, and then what got us to scale 5 years ago really wasn't scaling us to where we needed to be in the future. And so we needed some system to make these workflows more manageable, more durable, more transactable, and that's where Temporal came in. Cool, so taking a look at this growth curve, last year, back in Jan, I think we started around 100,000 actions a month. We're targeting 100 million by the end of this year. And so, your first inclination when you see this chart is like, okay, how did you scale that fast? What did you do? And a big part of that is really, and the focus of today's talk is putting the foundation in place the first 3 months to help a system like Temporal scale. And from our perspective, what we found super useful is really focusing on four key things. So Kubernetes, all our workers that interface with Temporal are on Kubernetes. Infrastructure as code, so we want to set up everything via Terraform, via pipelines. Observability is key, right? Like when we think about scaling to millions of actions, and that's a lot for us, maybe not for like OpenAI, but like how do you manage that, right? Like what's going on, what's happening across these systems, and as you think of interdependent systems, workflows calling other workflows, like what's actually going on. And then lastly, an orchestration layer to make all this happen. And for us, the natural fit was Temporal. And so when you think about like creating a foundation, my team's really existence is to standardize and federate engineering best practices across the firm. And so our goal with Temporal is let's create an ecosystem before we onboard other engineers, other engineering teams, so we can make this a success. So why did this growth actually work? Well, again, 4 main pillars for us. All our executions have to happen in our cloud. There's a lot of regulatory rules that we need to follow. And so we can't really farm out to something like a Lambda because our data is protected by, we're a big Azure customer. Our data is within the Azure cloud. Our processes are all hidden behind private link. So when we were evaluating, like, what are we going to use, we needed something that could let us farm out the actual execution to Kubernetes. So we managed something like 40 Kubernetes clusters. Each Kubernetes cluster is single tenant, single environment, and has a dedicated subnet. So if you're thinking, so I'll give you an example. So our core team, we have a dev, UAT, and prod cluster. Each subnet gives us the flexibility to be permissive with our networking rules, right? So like the front office will have more bespoke networking rules to talk to exchanges, so on and so forth, versus our cluster. And so this is like really, really important to us. Like the execution has to happen in our cloud. And so when we evaluated a lot of tools, a lot of providers want the execution to happen on their cloud. That was really a non-starter for us. And so this was a real natural bond between us. And then again, observability. So one of the issues we were facing is we run something on the order of like 6 or 7 different workflow systems at APO when we started this journey. A lot of these workflows are actually interconnected, but they're interconnected through different systems that don't talk to each other directly, right? You might be in one SDLC process, you're in another SDLC process. And so getting everyone on one workflow engine, it's really important that I can have a holistic view of what the heck's going on. Are we healthy? And we have like really, really strict requirements on like, risk needs to be calculated at a certain time for trading. End of the day, recon has to happen. And so a lot of these bespoke requirements means that we need to be super reliable. And then IAC first, I think this is like kind of a given. We wanted to make sure that all the infrastructure we set up, both with Temporal and around Temporal, is completely Terraform first, all in a centralized SDLC, and then our workflow scheduler, obviously. That's Temporal, that's why I'm here today. And so to make things more challenging for us, we did this when we had around 10 SDLC platforms. So we're doing a lot of consolidation from the RIP. Cool. And so when we look at alternative asset workflows, they're really messy. And that's kind of just the belly of the beast. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is like some of the things that we face with. So like ETL pipelines. ETL is really important in our world. We load from many disparate data sources. We might write to some database. We might write to some warehouse. If you look at accounting, that's kind of obvious. We move like tremendous amount of capital around. Are we moving the capital to the right place? Do we know like how much money we have on hand? And as we think about the number of funds we have like in the thousands. And so it becomes quite tricky to manage this. And so our just old systems were really just kicking the bucket. Like they're not scaling, they're not giving us what we need. And as a result, we're facing like some severe limitations in how we scale. And then I won't go through each individual one, but like you can imagine if we can't onboard clients, we can't do transactions, if we can't make money, that's not good when you're trying to run a business. Internal ops, data recon, scheduled jobs. This one is a bit bespoke, I think, to the finance space. So a lot of folks a lot of businesses are completely asynchronous. We have really, really, really strict requirements on when things are running and when they need to complete by. So we have long-running workflows. Those need to complete, I'm just making it up, by like 8 p.m. so recon can finish. So by end of the day, we have a complete transaction of what's going on. And as we look to scale to our business, scale to more clients, it's really, really important that these things occur at the time we say they're going to happen. And equally important, that when we think of like many workflows happening in parallel, we have a complete view of like what's ready, like are we ready for business? Have we hit everything that the SLAs that we said we were going to hit? And are we transacting correctly? And so one of the real gnarly things about this is breaks aren't really clean. So something might fail in my ETL pipeline. All of a sudden, like a dashboard for a trader has the wrong value. And those are like really, really complex to solve because you're gonna have to backfill what happened and go through this entire train. And oftentimes these systems, not oftentimes, historically these weren't the one connected system. And so, classic failure, scenarios, you might have things that fail silently, like that's bad. You might have things that are flaky. You might have things that are, say they're running correctly, but they're not running correctly. And so these are all things we're thinking of. And it's important for us to make sure that as we design our workflow engine, as we scale across our various engineering BUs, we can interconnect workflows, see what's going on, making sure that we have the right signals, and that we can say like, with complete proof that we're actually, we're running correctly and we're healthy. And so again, like how do you do this? Or like how do we did it at Apollo? And it's with a strong foundation. And so first 30 days, I think this is where things die on the vine. You need like cybersecurity's buy-in. So we worked with our CISO. And again, like a real important part of why Temporal worked for us is our executions need to happen in our cloud. So for a long time, we were like evaluating other products. They're like, hey, just deploy to our cloud, and that was a non-starter. And then the fact that Temporal's only really collecting metadata, the actual logs we're scraping, we have access to, is a big, big plus. And so other things, role-based access controls. So we have SOX compliance, and it's important that only certain folks can do certain behaviors. So like, we can't have every engineer restart a job. We need to make sure that like those who are pushing PRs to create new jobs are allowed to do so. And then like there's more fine-grained controls. Like we have support folks who are like monitoring, like L1 support who are monitoring jobs. They need a subset of permissions. So this gets a bit like complicated and convoluted. But the fact that we can map that all to Terraform, we can map that in our SDLC, we can trace it back, was huge. And then when we think of audit logging, for us, again, equally important. Things go awry all the time, right? Like even a good idempotent workflow scheduler, you might push some bad code, you might push some change that silently works, it's been working for weeks, and then you're like, whoa, this ain't good. So having audit logging enabled, very huge for us. We consume all that data, we aggregate it. Thankfully, knock on wood, we haven't had to use it, that's important. And then more table stake stuff, right? Like secret management, make sure things are in our key vault. We want to auto-rotate certs. We don't want people with access to like our production namespaces. And then when we look at our networking, equally important, we want to make sure that connectivity between our cloud environment and Temporal works seamlessly. We want all the firewall rules unblocked. You want DNS configuration. You want proper load balancing. So we're a big Azure shop. And one of the hurdles we had to get over with is historically we like to private link between our instance of Azure and somebody else's, like some other Azure hosted SaaS private link. So Temporal did not support that at the time, but because we interface with our our CISO early, and we had the added benefit of being able to run in our cloud, Temporal's only collecting our metadata. That was a great way to calm over fears of our traffic talking from one provider to another. Now it's my understanding that the Azure functionality is coming out quite soon, so we're happy to beta test that. And as we think of our partnership, that's really important to us. Like we mentioned this feature a year and a half ago. Andrew promised it was coming, and so we're really, really pumped to start beta testing that. And then again, infrastructure, Terraform modules for everything. Terraform for our Kubernetes, Terraform for our namespaces. We create many, many namespaces. The fact that we can create namespaces with granularity, the fact that we can create namespaces with the proper RBAC and keep them segregated is huge. Like heaven forbid, you don't want some front office namespace, some workers from a different namespace accessing that front office namespace. And so having that segregation to us was like a very nice, clean delineation. I think we hit something like 160 namespaces. So we're gonna need that soft limit upgraded. So just a heads up, Andrew. And then the platform, right? Like we need to make sure that the Temporal cloud setup's done. We have SDK integration. We need to be able to deploy workers on Kubernetes, and the namespaces are configured. So when Core develops a new platform, we're really big on a few things. Like one, we need to centralize how we build the platform. So if you notice, we're at the center. And so what does that mean? well, we have to dog food all our stuff, right? Like we dog food our Kubernetes dog food our Kubernetes clusters, we dog food the RBAC on Kubernetes. And so we made a mission to say, hey, listen, we have a bunch of metrics that we need for like our senior management in terms of like code commits and like how many containers we create and a bunch of like cloud heuristics. And so we decided to move to Temporal first. So we got rid of all our cron jobs. We got rid of a lot of bespoke scripts that we had running, and we moved everything to Temporal. Now, one of the challenges with like scaling across a large financial institution, or I guess medium financial institution, is you don't want to face the boil the ocean problem. And what I mean by that is like we were a handful of engineers and we were promising a lot of things. Like we were promising we're going to scale to millions of actions. We're going to kill off a bunch of legacy systems. It's going to be faster, more proficient. And the truth of the matter is we just couldn't scale fast enough as a team. So we decided to target this in waves. So wave one core, you could actually just flip this however you want, back office, middle office, front office. We started with the back office. So these are a lot of workflows which kick off stored procs and do validations that things are operating correctly. These start at like a certain time of day. So that's where we start first. Then we slowly broach to our middle office and then our front office. Now, one of the challenges here is when you create a foundation, like it can be like as both somebody who worked on the desk and who worked in core, there can be a bit of friction. And so the friction's really like, hey, listen, I want to move faster. I don't want to use your templates. I don't want to use your SDK. Like this is kind of being forced upon me. So again, that's why like going slow and measured was really important for us. And biggest thing is without federating properly, like this is just going to die on the vine, right? Like we're just going to have another product that we added. And so instead of going from 7 workflow systems, we go up to 8, and that's kind of the worst thing you can do, right? Like for us, that'd be a colossal failure. So, like, how do you eliminate the boilerplate? How do you make people happy? How do you go into proper structure and not into like structured chaos, right? So one of the fears I had with Temporal is like, I can do things really fast, I can execute, but the worst thing I can do is like give somebody a powerful tool and then just take down the entire system. Because it's super easy to do, right? Like you can durably retry many, many times and you can essentially DDoS yourself. So what do you need to do? So from an observability front, we like this purple dog. I guess, I don't know if I'm allowed to say the name of that company, but we integrated that into our entire stack. So we have agents deployed on our Kubernetes cluster, monitoring our workers. We are bound to the Temporal SDK, the Temporal metrics. So I have a complete holistic view of everything that's going on. And then the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about the observability. And so CI/CD, they're all actually important, but we started with 10 CI/CD systems. So as we're organizing workflow orchestrators, we're also organizing the way we write and execute code at the firm. So it's super important that we dog food and create as a seamless process as possible. So we created automated pipelines for deploying your Temporal workflows. This did things like version, schedule, had auditing, all that built in. So if 1 year from now, somebody's like, hey, why does workflow exist? Who approved it? Where does it, like, how does it come to fruition? Well, we can work back. It's like this commit created this namespace that created this worker, and this is exactly the activities bound to this workflow. And we tie that back to our change management. And it's like, oh, okay, like this was a result of like this requirement. And then I just can't stress this enough. One of the things we saw across a multitude of these workflow systems is a lot of code was just duped all over the place. So it existed outside of SDLC. So in like 4 different workflow systems, you have things like SFTP this file to some exchange, or SFTP this to some broker dealer, give me some calcs, take those calcs, and that's like our risk. So what we did was we did an analysis on really like the top 15 most used functions. And so we developed libraries to coalesce all those functions. And so we have essentially a Java and Python libraries for Temporal, which wrap activities quite nicely for you. So if you want to SFTP, if you want to write to blob storage, to box, a whole host of things, all that's done for you. And the add-on effect of that is we have a bunch of templates for our engineers at the firm. And so these templates remove a lot of the boilerplate. So like we SFTP a lot. That's not really our requirement. That's a requirement of some of the like vendors we use and their APIs. And so if you want to SFTP some file from Box or Blob or what have you, we have templates in place. You really just pipe what's the source, what's the destination. And since we've locked down everything on each Kubernetes cluster, we have the network isolation, so I can't SFTP from UAT to some prod resource. And this has been a big, big boon for us. As we think of eliminating additional workflow systems, having these templates and libraries handy make it real simple for us. And I'll give you an exact use case of how we killed an ETL system later. And then Terraform, like everything IAC. Like I don't want somebody to reach out to me to create a new temporal namespace. I don't want to be the bottleneck. I want it all templated. You want a new namespace, just create the PR, we'll approve it. Super quick, super fast. So what do we mean by observability? So from day one, we want all the cloud metrics. All this is flowing into our observability platform. We have SDK metrics from Temporal. So everything around like latency, how many retries, how many executions have happened. And that, like, I really want to harp on the executions. So oftentimes I'll have somebody in my senior management say, hey, Alban, like, all right, we brought on tool X, Y, and Z. Like, how successful is this? Like, are we actually using this? So by capturing the number of executions, actions, like, it quickly became apparent that, like, hey, we're doing 1 million actions a month now. We're doing 10 million. And that painted the story like, hey, like, I can provably show that these other workflow orchestrators are going down. Temporal's going up. Like, we're executing faster. It's more efficient. It's more cost efficient. And it's hard to really get all three of those. But having those metrics available, super important. We're working on this now, but traces. We want every temporal workflow to admit a trace that we aggregate in one spot. And the big reason why that's important is you can imagine when you have like these graph of workflows running, you're like, what actually executed from start to finish? What happened historically? So emitting traces is important to us. It helps us get a gauge and a feel for like, hey, what's going on? And I can provably tell you like, okay, this workflow failed because it's talking to this downstream system and that downstream system is not reacting appropriately. And then this is less temporal, more on the infrastructure side. Historically, we've been a huge VM shop. So we operated like 4-digit number of virtual machines. Those virtual machines, we didn't have the best observability into that. So what we did with Kubernetes is observability into the entire cluster. So I can look at pod health, worker health, how many times those workers have bounced, the logs that happened, metrics around the actual workers themselves. And this is also important because what we've seen is like we've had folks create workflows and like the workflows keep restarting and then we're like, all right, let's triage what's going on. Well, it's restarting because like these code paths have really ballooned the amount of memory for this pod. And so it's not really a temporal issue, it's more like, or a Kubernetes issue, it's more like, hey, listen, we need to make this more efficient. We're doing things in not the best manner. And then alerting. This I don't hear too much about, but for us, again, there's things that need to happen, start of day, end of day, middle of day. And so being able to send a Teams message, being able to get a Teams message or an on-call when something fails is huge. So if things fail downstream and it's silent, it's kind of one of the worst things that can happen to us, because what that means is start of day, the next day, we're like we have an inaccurate view of how much cash we have on hand. We thought we made some trades that we didn't, and so it creates a huge amount of headache. And then, you can imagine if you're not hitting your SLAs, like other various not nice things happen. So real quick, so one of the use cases we had with AI, we took a legacy ETL platform, and our goal was like, how fast can we move this to Temporal? And so we had something on the order of like 100 plus jobs. They were doing around like 2 million executions a month. And so some of it was cron, some of it was, bespoke legacy stuff. And like, okay, we initially said, hey, it's gonna take 3 to 6 months for us to retire the system. What we've done is we've created our own temporal skill internally. So we've taken that temporal skill, which says, hey, reference these templates, reference these libraries, reference these patterns, and the actual temporal skill, and we've combined them both. And we hit some like real amazing numbers. So like 95% of the code was generated. We use a mixture of Claude and OpenAI. So 95% of the code was just translated straight from our legacy ETL platform to Temporal. The remaining 5% or 5 to 10%, what we've noticed was, and this is where I think you have to be really careful, it's very easy to take a bad paradigm and map it to Temporal. So we had jobs doing something like, I had a 1,000 retry limit, and I had a 1,000 retry limit because it was operating on a virtual machine and expected like these bespoke paths to happen. And then when it was mapped to Temporal, it just like blew up like a machine gun. And so that's where like human element, like, okay, like what's going on? And then all of this, we did it through a CI/CD pipeline. It created a plan for you. You validated the plan. And then what was the impact? So we migrated this entire ETL system. It's literally live in production last Saturday, knock on wood, no issues. Took 3 weeks. Again, 95% of the code was generated with Claude and OpenAI. One-click migration. And this is the thing like our engineers were really happy about. Like it didn't replace the need for them. It replaced this migration tax. And so oftentimes the biggest burden for consolidating is like you're going from some system that's operated maybe decently, maybe poorly, maybe good, to a new system. And that requires you to stop what you're doing, stop your focus. And so where possible, we want our desk engineers to be laser focused on writing new functionality for the business, creating new flows. And so removing this migration tax was huge for us. And so now we're live in production. And then I guess let's take it a step back. There's really like 3 phases to this journey for us. Phase 1 is the foundation. Getting this proper cyber approval, get your network and infra set up correctly. Start small with your orchestration platform. We started with our team. We did a bunch of demos. One of my favorite demos is we did a tech talk. We were like, hey, we're bringing in Temporal. And then I brought up these production jobs, which just ran metrics. So they were like low risk. And our workers were operating in like 2 regions. And I just killed all the workers in East live for production. I was like, I'm not phased. This is going to fail over correctly. This is a big reason why we want Temporal. It's not just I have a cron job. I need to make sure this reliably executes. So we have workers in both regions. And like I don't think about it anymore, right? Like I have high degree of confidence it'll fail over correctly and it'll execute exactly according to spec. And then phase 2, expansion, right? Like start looking at your enterprise teams, create your libraries and templates. Oftentimes people are like, where do I start? I think with AI, with a skills library, if you have your own skills marketplace, it reduces that. But that skills marketplace or collection of skills need to reference proper libraries and templates. Each organization has their own bespoke use cases, what they care about. CI/CD, we do everything through CI/CD, no manual creation of anything. We don't allow that to happen. Everything's traced back to Git commit, makes our lives easier, makes auditors happy because we can trace every single workflow, every single approval, every single mutation to a click. Your observability layer, absolutely important. And then like as we think of how we accelerate, like we're using AI and skills to really target more and more workflows. We're on track to retire another 2 systems. That'll bring us around to 100 million actions a month. And equally as important, we want this to be completely self-service, right? Like my team can't be the bottleneck for how we scale. They can't be the bottleneck for how folks create new workflows. We want to create the biases around templates, CI/CD pipelines, but we want teams completely self-service. Create your own namespaces, assign to the users that matter to you, create and spawn as many workers as you see fit, and go forward. And then I think this is the next big use case for us is cross-asset workflows. So I showed you that like interconnection of like 10 different workflows we're creating. So first step, yes, get them in Temporal, and then it's like, how do we leverage things like Nexus? How do we leverage things of like workflows of workflows? And that's where we see our scale going forward. Right now, it's crawl, walk, run. We're walking fast, and our goal is to run. Like, let's start accelerating this. Let's keep committing more actions. Let me start taking down more systems. And then once we're all speaking the same language, we're working on the same durable execution platform, a lot of the new things just happen naturally. Oftentimes, what I saw that didn't work entirely well is like folks might start talking about Nexus when people just want standalone activities. And that was like real key to the speech today is for most people, they just want to like get their foot in the door. Let me kill all this cron jobs. Now I have like a durable way of making sure these execute. And then you start layering on like, okay, like there's a lot more complexity here. We're managing workflows of workflows. You need some like intermediary layer. And that's where some of the more temporal features come in, are really important. Key takeaways, what we learned for orchestrating at scale. Again, start with your cyber team, make sure they're right. You don't, like most POVs we've seen fail, is like people ignore cyber and then cyber's not happy. Thankfully, we have a great relationship with them. Build the golden paths, templates, libraries, create them, have them, talk about them, embed them in your skills, in your markdown. Get your observability working correctly. Embrace AI-assisted migrations. Oftentimes, like, there might be a hesitance to take some of these smaller or complex workflows and map them with AI. Like, you can build parallel workflows, verify that the outputs at each stage of the workflow, and that gives you a great degree of confidence that things just work. Cool, so we got to production in 30 days. We had 95% accuracy. We are at 15 million actions per month now. We have 8 engineering BUs. We're looking to expand more things outside of outside of engineering proper. We're looking at our risk and quant platforms and how do we scale them. They have much more, their workflows are complex in different ways, like calculating curves and such. And so, yeah, that's our goal. Thank you for having me, and any questions?